The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which was the same day Lenora Vane buried her last reason to stay in St. Louis. Her uncle's funeral had drawn 9 people, counting the pastor and the gravedigger. The house on Maple Street, which had never really felt like home but had served as one for 11 years, would go to creditors by the end of the month. The solicitor had explained it plainly, without apology, the way men explained things to women they assumed would weep and need sitting down. Lenora had not wept. She had thanked him, walked home in the November cold, and found the letter wedged under the door. It was from a man named Calhoun, Fletcher Calhoun. He had written to the placement agency in Chicago, and the agency had forwarded the inquiry to St. Louis, where Lenora had registered 6 weeks earlier without telling her uncle. The letter was short. He needed a woman who could cook, keep accounts, and manage a household. He had a son, 8 years old. He ran cattle on 400 acres outside Harlan, Texas. He was not looking for sentiment. He was looking for someone practical. Lenora read it twice, then set it on the table next to the cold stove. She was 29 years old. She had spent 11 years keeping her uncle's house, managing his books when the rheumatism took his hands, and nursing him through 2 winters that should have finished him and one that finally did. She had 1 trunk, $42, and a degree of practical experience that no one in St. Louis had ever thought to pay for. The agency fee had taken nearly everything she had left. She wrote back that evening. She said she was available immediately. The train into Harlan took 2 days. Lenora sat with her trunk in the luggage car for the last stretch because the passenger car was full, and the conductor had not seen fit to argue with the ranchers taking up the bench seats. She did not complain about this. She had learned early that complaining used energy better spent on other things. She arrived at 2:30 in the afternoon, stepped down onto a platform of sun-bleached planks, and found no one waiting for her. The station agent told her Fletcher Calhoun's place was 7 miles north. He said it without looking up from his ledger. Lenora asked if there was a livery. He said there was. She hired a wagon, loaded her trunk, and drove herself north on a road that was more suggestion than fact. The Calhoun ranch sat at the end of a long, flat stretch of winter grass. The main house low and square against the sky. A barn behind it with a leaning hinge on the left door. There was a corral with 8 horses. There was a bunkhouse. There was a boy of about 8 sitting on the porch steps, watching her pull up, and there was a man standing in the yard with a hammer in his hand and a look on his face that suggested her arrival had interrupted something more important. Fletcher Calhoun was taller than she had expected. He had the kind of face that had probably been young once and had since been burned and weathered past any softness. He was 41 years old, according to the agency file, and looked every year of it. He studied the wagon, then her, then the trunk. "Miss Vane," he said. "Mr. Calhoun." She set the brake and climbed down without waiting for help. He did not offer any. That, at least, she appreciated. The boy on the steps was named Emmett. He had his father's eyes and a careful, watchful quality that she recognized in children who had learned to be quiet around adults. He stood which meant someone had taught him manners, and said, "How do you do?" which meant someone had followed through on them. Fletcher showed her the house without ceremony. Kitchen, parlor, 2 bedrooms, his at the back, Emmett's beside it, and a small room off the kitchen that had been used for storage and would now be hers. It had 1 window facing east, and a cot that looked like it had survived several decades of hard use. There was a hook on the wall and a washstand in the corner. "I'll clear the crates out by tomorrow," he said. "I can clear them tonight," she said. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded and walked back outside. The kitchen accounts were kept in a ledger on a nail above the stove. She looked at them before she unpacked anything else. The numbers were not alarming on their face, but they had a particular pattern she recognized. Money going out steadily, not catastrophically, but consistently more than what was coming in. There was a note in the back of the ledger about a loan, $3,000, taken 18 months ago against the land. She did not know when it was due. She put the ledger back and began moving crates. The first 2 weeks established the shape of things. Lenora rose before the men, had coffee and biscuits on the table by 5:30, and managed the kitchen with the economy of someone who had spent years making too little stretch to cover too much. She found where Fletcher kept the supply ledger, reviewed it without being asked, and reorganized the ordering so that they were not buying salt in small quantities at high prices when they could buy in bulk from the co-op in Harlan. She mentioned this to him one evening in the same tone she might use to report the weather. He listened. He did not thank her. The next week, he placed the larger order. Emmett was her most consistent company. He had a gap between his front teeth and a tendency to carry rocks in his pockets, which she discovered when she did the washing. He was not a difficult child. He was, if anything, too easy, too accommodating, with the learned flexibility of someone accustomed to disappearing when adults were stressed. She asked him once what he liked to do. He thought about it seriously. "Look at things," he said. "What kinds of things?" "Different things. The way the creek moves. How the horses stand when it's going to rain." He paused. "My mother used to read to me." Lenora noted this and said nothing further about it that day. Fletcher's wife had died 2 years before Lenora arrived. Fever, according to the agency notes. Emmett had been 6. There were no photographs visible in the house, which was either deliberate or the result of a grief that expressed itself through removal. Fletcher did not speak of his wife except once, at the end of the 3rd week, when Emmett mentioned her at supper and Fletcher put down his fork, was quiet for a count of 3, then picked it up again. That was the whole of it. He was not unkind. He was not warm. He was a man who had organized his life around function and had stopped expecting it to be anything else. She understood this more than she expected to. What she had not expected was the loan. She found the full terms on a document tucked into the back of a leather folio in the parlor, which she had opened while looking for a repair receipt for the barn roof. The loan was due in 4 months. The amount remaining was $2,800. The lender was a man named Harlan, who also happened to own the only bank in town. The interest rate was structured in a way that had been, she read it 3 times to be certain, deliberately obscured. What appeared to be a reasonable monthly rate was compounded in a manner that added nearly $400 to what Fletcher appeared to believe he owed. She sat with the document for a long time. Then she put it back exactly as she had found it and went to start supper. She did not bring it up for another week. In that time, she drove into Harlan twice, once for supplies and once on her own, which Fletcher did not ask her about. She went to the county land office and reviewed the property records for the Calhoun ranch. She went to the newspaper office and asked if they had back issues from the previous year, which they did. She read them at the counter, looking for nothing in particular, and finding several things. Harlan had purchased 3 other ranch properties in the past 18 months. All 3 had been under loan with his bank. All 3 had defaulted within 6 months of the loan terms she could find on public record. She also learned from the land clerk that there had been a survey dispute on the northern 40 acres of Fletcher's property. The dispute was recorded but unresolved. The clerk mentioned, without apparent awareness of the significance, that Harlan had filed the original survey challenge. On her way back, she stopped at the dry goods store and bought a pound of coffee and a writing tablet. That evening, after Emmett was in bed, she put the tablet on the kitchen table and said, "Mr. Calhoun, I'd like to talk to you about the loan." He had been cleaning a bridle near the fire. He looked up. "I found the document in the folio," she said. "I was looking for the barn receipt. I should have told you sooner that I'd seen it." He set the bridle down. She laid out what she had found, plainly in order. The compounded interest discrepancy. The 3 foreclosures. The survey challenge she did not editorialize. She presented it the way she would have presented an account ledger. "Here are the numbers, here's what they mean." Fletcher listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "The lawyer who drew up the loan is Doss's brother-in-law," he said finally. "I suspected something like that. I don't have $2,800. I know. So what do you think I should do?" She had been thinking about this for a week. Challenge the interest calculation in county court. The compounding structure may not be legal under Texas statute. I found a reference in an 1881 case that suggests it isn't. You'd need a lawyer, not Doss's, and it would take time. But if the calculation is ruled improper, the amount due resets to what it should have been. She paused. You'd also need to address the survey dispute before Doss can use it as a secondary lever. He looked at her for a long moment. "Where did you learn to read legal documents?" "My uncle was a solicitor for 30 years. I kept his office." He nodded slowly. "Then, why are you telling me this?" It was a fair question. She thought about how to answer it honestly. "Because it's your land," she said, "and I've been keeping your house for 3 weeks, and your son just started sleeping through the night again. and I'd rather not move again come spring. Something crossed his face that was not quite a smile and was not quite anything else. All right, he said. The lawyer they found was a woman, which surprised Fletcher and did not surprise Lenora. Her name was Vera Paxwell, and she practiced out of a room above the harness shop in a town called Brackwater, 20 miles east. She was 60 years old, thin as wire, and had a way of reading documents that suggested she was eating them. She confirmed Lenora's reading of the interest statute within 20 minutes. She also had thoughts about the survey challenge. Doss has done this before, Vera said. She did not seem surprised. We know, Lenora said. Do you have witnesses to the original boundary? Neighbors who've known the property lines for years? Fletcher thought. Old Pete Dunbar. His family's been on the adjacent land since before I was born. Get me a written statement from Dunbar by the end of the month. Vera set the documents down. Mr. Calhoun, you're not the first man Doss has done this to. You may have an opportunity to be the last. The ride back to the ranch was mostly quiet. The sky was going orange in the west, and the grass was silver where the light hit it flat. Emmett had come along and was asleep against Lenora's side with his hat over his face. After a while, Fletcher said, He's taken to you. He's a good boy. He is. He kept his eyes on the road. His mother used to read to him at night. I haven't done that. I don't. He stopped. I've been reading to him, Lenora said. In the evenings, he nodded once. Nothing more. Harlan Doss was not a subtle man. He was a man who had gotten away with a particular kind of behavior for long enough that he had stopped bothering to be careful about it. When the petition challenging the loan terms was filed with the county court, he came to the ranch himself. He arrived on a Wednesday morning while Fletcher was out on the north pasture, which Lenora did not believe was coincidental. She was at the kitchen window when his buggy came up the drive. She dried her hands and went to the door before he reached the porch. Harlan Doss was thick through the shoulders with a red face and an expression that had probably been described, at some point in his life, as commanding. He looked at Lenora with the particular assessment of a man who had decided in advance that she was not a factor worth calculating. I'm here to speak with Calhoun, he said. He's not available, she said. Then I'll wait. I can give him a message. He looked at her more directly then. Are you the housekeeper? I manage the household, yes. He seemed to decide something. Then you can tell your employer that this lawsuit is a mistake. Courts take time. Banks don't. If the note isn't paid in full by the due date, I'll move to foreclose regardless of any filing. Lenora looked at him steadily. I'll relay that. He'd do well to drop the challenge and renegotiate. On what terms? He smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. Terms we can discuss. Man to man. I see. She waited a moment. Mr. Doss, the interest calculation in your loan document is a violation of the Texas statute on compounded debt instruments, specifically Section 14 of the 1881 Lending Act. The county court has already accepted the petition. You may also want to know that a surveyor from Austin has been engaged to review the boundary challenge, an independent surveyor, not one contracted through your office. And Peter Dunbar has provided a written statement regarding the original property lines, signed and notarized, which is now in the court record. She paused. Is there anything else you'd like me to relay to Mr. Calhoun? Doss's expression had shifted. The performance of ease was still there, but underneath it something had recalibrated. You've been busy, he said. I manage the household, she said again. He left without saying anything further. She went back inside and finished the bread she had been kneading. Fletcher came in at noon, and she told him about the visit. She told it plainly, beginning to end, and watched his jaw tighten at the part about Doss waiting to speak to him while she was alone in the house. He asked her twice if she was all right. She said she was, both times, and meant it. That evening was different in a way she did not have a word for at first. He stayed in the kitchen after supper, instead of going to the parlor. He helped Emmett with his reading lesson, which he had not done before, and when Lenora started washing the dishes, he stood next to her and dried them without being asked. They did not talk much. They did not need to. Later, when Emmett was in bed, Fletcher sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and said without looking up, You could have told me about the loan the day you found it. Yes, she said. Why didn't you? She thought about it honestly. I wanted to know more before I said anything. I didn't want to hand you a problem without also having thought through a solution. He turned the mug in his hands. Most people would have stayed out of it. I don't see the value in that. He was quiet for a while. Then the agency. told me you were a housekeeper, a cook. I am. That's not all you are. She looked at him. No, she said. It isn't. He nodded slowly, like he was adjusting to something, finding the new weight of it. I should have asked more. Before you came, you asked what you needed to know at the time, I suppose. He set down the mug. I'm glad you came, Miss Vane, for what that's worth. It was not a grand declaration. It was the kind of thing a practical man said when he meant something, and did not know another way to say it. For what it's worth, she said, so am I. The court ruling came in February. The interest calculation was found to be in violation of the state lending statute. The amount due was recalculated at the lawful rate, which reduced it by nearly $500 and extended the repayment window by 8 months. The survey challenge was dismissed on the evidence provided, including Dunbar's statement and the independent surveyor's report, which confirmed that Doss's original filing had relied on a deliberately altered baseline measurement. The judge, in issuing the ruling, noted that this was the third matter involving Harlan Doss's lending practices to come before him in 2 years, and that he was referring the pattern to the state banking authority for review. Vera Paxwell sent a note that said, "Well done." 2 words. Lenora kept it. Fletcher paid the corrected amount over the following 6 months, selling a portion of the herd at good price in the spring. The land was free and clear by October. The thing between them was not a dramatic thing. It did not arrive with any announcement. It was in the way he had started saving her the corner piece of the cornbread, which he had figured out she preferred, without ever asking if she preferred it. It was in the way she noticed when he had a headache. He rubbed the back of his neck in a particular way and put the coffee on stronger, without comment. It was in the way Emmett had stopped being careful around both of them at the same time, which was the clearest signal of all. He asked her to marry him in March at the kitchen table at 7 in the morning, before she had finished her first cup of coffee. He said he thought she should know he was not a man who said things twice. He said that what he could offer her was the land, such as it was, and his word, which he kept, and a boy who had already decided she was necessary. He said he understood if she needed time to think. She did not need time to think. She had been thinking since February. She said yes. They were married by the circuit preacher in April, in the parlor of the ranch house, with Emmett in his good shirt and Vera Paxwell as witness, which Vera seemed to find satisfying in the way she found most things that came to a right conclusion. Pete Dunbar brought a bottle of something that smelled like turpentine and tasted not much better, and they drank it anyway because it was neighborly. It was not a large wedding. It was sufficient. Lenora Calhoun lived on that land for 43 years. She kept the accounts, which eventually extended to a second property when they bought out the Dunbar family's eastern acreage after Pete died with no heirs. She learned to ride properly, which Fletcher taught her with the same economy he brought to most things. Short instructions, long patience. She learned which of the horses could be trusted in a storm and which could not. She learned when to push against the land and when to wait. Emmett grew up, quick and quiet like his father, then found a voice for himself somewhere in his 20s that neither of his parents had seen coming. He became a schoolteacher in Brackwater, which delighted Vera Paxwell in the last year of her life, and later wrote a small book about the legal history of West Texas land disputes that cited, without naming her, a case in which a ranch housekeeper had identified a fraudulent loan structure and brought it to county court. Lenora read that chapter twice and did not tell Emmett she recognized the story. Fletcher died in 1903, in the fall, which was the season he had always said suited him best. He was 67. He had spent the last years of his life working fewer hours and talking somewhat more, which was not the same as talking much. In the final months, he had taken to sitting on the porch in the evenings and watching the light go off the grass in a way that reminded Lenora of something Emmett had said as a child about looking at things. She buried him on the North Rise, where the land flattened out and you could see to the horizon in 3 directions. It seemed right. She lived another 14 years. The land went to Emmett, as it always would have. But before she died, Lenora had arranged something else, a provision in her own papers, separate from the property deed. The old bunkhouse, which had been unused since they'd reduced the herd in the 1890s, was to be converted and turned over to the town of Harlan for use as a public reading room. The provision came with a small endowment, enough to maintain it for 20 years, and a single instruction. It was to be open to anyone who came. No name was put on the door. That had been her stipulation. She had written it herself, in her own hand, in the same ledger book, where she had once reorganized a supply order and quietly begun to understand what this land and this life might amount to. She had not arrived looking for any of it. She had arrived with a trunk and $42 and a practical mind, and she had simply not turned away from what was in front of her. That was all. That was enough.